It is utterly exciting to be here in a room full of smart and curious men and women and men. And I was very nervous about this, to be with this panel of people who I've had sort of fan crushed for years. And so I spent the afternoon preparing emotionally by eating all the ice cream I could find in our freezer. Sorry, darling, you know that's, but I feel much better now, and I'm ready to go ahead with this panel. And we were sorry to have lost Jessica Valenti, and I hope she will feel better soon, and B, weigh in on the book with her insights in some future forum. In the meantime, the four of us have a lot to say. And here is the plan for the next hour, for those of you who like to be organized. Here's what we're going to do. First, I'm going to make a quick introduction of the panelists. And second, since many of you will not have had a chance to look at the book or its beautiful cover, I will read the first 3 paragraphs and say something about what the book means to do, so that we're starting out somewhat on the same page. Then Regina, Martha, and Amelia will take over with their points of view and questions among ourselves. And the fourth thing is we turn to you for your questions. Okay, so now we're at stage 1, the introduction. What you see before you are 4 brilliant yet non-identical feminists who are going to talk about abortion. Our assembly is something like a version of the old joke. An actress, an activist, a journalist, and a lawyer walk into the Strand. And of course, we'll only know the punchline at the end of the hour, and then I think none of us will forget it. For those of you not familiar with the entire crew, let me first introduce Amelia Bonow, the co-founder with Lindy West of Shout Your Abortion. Yes. Here is how it all began. A few years back, Amelia posted the following on her Facebook page. Hi guys, like a year ago, I had an abortion at Planned Parenthood and remember this experience with a near inexpressible level of gratitude. I have a good heart and having an abortion made me happy in a totally unqualified way. Why wouldn't I be happy that I was not forced to become a mother? This post blossomed into a form of hashtag journalism and hashtag activism, and talking activism, whose central idea has been that abortion is an ordinary practice and that the word is something you can say out loud. To put this in question form, as I do in the book, one of the things I was trying to figure out, why are too many women in the U.S. creeping around in shame and silence when they know they did the right thing by ending a pregnancy that either was or had become unwanted? Okay, to my next left is Martha Plimpton, actress and activist, who you will know from television, movies, and theater. Her newest release, if I have this right, is a short called The Yellow Wallpaper.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, you're right.
Okay. And that is a short story that should bring a chill, I think, to those of you to chill the spines of all of you who are women's studies majors. I see a few people shaking and being chilled. Perhaps those of you who saw the movie The Room or read that book will also enjoy this. Okay. Now, I don't know how we were so lucky to get you to come. I don't know whether it's because theaters are dark on Monday or just... Okay. Due to her unemployed status, Martha was able to join us tonight, and we're very grateful for that and hope it is short-lived. Martha has lobbied Congress on behalf of Planned Parenthood, and she has spoken at campuses and rallies around the country. I think recently in Seattle, yeah, with Lindy. Okay. She's also the co-founder and board president of the organization called A is for. A is for, and so note when I read this, A is for, my hand began going like this, turning the jump rope, which I found very odd. I couldn't figure out why I was having this motion. And then A is for Alice, but not in this case, yeah. That organization, A is for, is dedicated to ending abortion stigma. Martha intends to work for women's rights to physical self-determination for, and here's the quote, for as long as it takes. And that is one of my favorite phrases. So, okay, and at the end, we have Regina Mahone, who is the managing director of the daily online publication Rewire, which was formerly RH Reality Check, so you might know it by either name. I looked up Rewire, and it says, provide with new electrical wiring. And in a way, that is exactly what Rewire does. It rewires our brains and I think our orientation to issues in ways that we need it. So thank you for the rewiring. And they do it by means of what I will call, if I can steal a phrase from my cousin Vinny, dead-on, balls-accurate investigating reporting and analysis on issues of reproduction and sexual health, rights, and justice. So, thank you. Did I just make a Trump gesture? Did you see that? I went like this. Forget it. Sorry. Okay. Rewire is the first place I turn every morning to find out what I should be paying attention to and how I should understand the various injustices that are lobbed at women every day and uncovered by Rewire quite often. Regina also writes for Rewire, but as its managing editor, she's responsible for getting the pieces in and the publication out. So thank you for all that on our behalf. I just retweeted a post this morning on the Trump administration's efforts to slap down teen pregnancy prevention by cutting back on contraceptive care and education, an article that you should really take a look at. Okay. Now, as for me, I'm a lawyer, but in a good way. One of the questions I set in the book is, why do some women who terminate an unwanted pregnancy feel like they have done something that is borderline criminal, just as we are coming up to the half-century mark of abortion's decriminalization in Roe v. Wade? That's a question that's worth thinking about. It is not thus in all other countries that have legalized abortion. It is often a settled issue, not in the U.S. So a major purpose of this book, or one of them, is to show women that to the extent they feel guilty, ashamed, or reticent to speak about abortion at the level of personal experience, they might be heartened to know that there is an entire structure of American law and culture aimed at bringing about exactly that result. So let me turn then to the book. And I thought it would help if just to read the first 3 paragraphs, so you would have a sense of where I stand on abortion, not in a legal sense. Of course, I support legal abortion, but how I think it plays out in women's lives. And so, this is just from the preface, and I'll just read the first 3 paragraphs. So, paragraph 1. Any book about abortion necessarily begins in media res. This is because the problem of unwanted pregnancy does not start with abortion. Abortion follows pregnancy, whether that pregnancy has been much sought after and is highly desired, or whether it is the worst thing ever. Pregnancy, in its turn, follows sexual intercourse, whether that intercourse was calculated, casual, or coerced. To say that abortion falls in the middle of things is to say that abortion is located at a discrete intersection in a woman's life. On one side, there is pregnancy. On the other side, there is non-pregnancy, and the status quo with regard to the number of children. A mother of 2 remains a mother of 2. A girl does not become a mother. Second paragraph. This is not to say that a woman's life necessarily proceeds exactly as it would have had there been no pregnancy and no abortion, though many lives do. For some women, abortion registers as a profound loss, the date or a projected birth date reflected upon, sometimes commemorated for years to come. For many others, the core reaction is one of relief and the welcome return of the preferred, at least for now, non-pregnant self that almost got away. Still, other women experience both relief, the most widely reported emotion following abortion, and some form of regret or wistfulness, not about the decision itself, but because the circumstances around the pregnancy, partner, finances, obligations, plans, were just not right enough to proceed. Last paragraph. In this way, every abortion has a context, a set of befores and imagined afters that inform how women's decisions about abortion are made and how they are experienced. It is as though on the chronological spectrum of a woman's life, a notional pushpin has been planted on the spot marking the decision. And that same pin marks the subject of this book. How women confront and decide about unwanted pregnancy within the complicated structures of constraint, personal, culture, and legal, that frame the issue of abortion in modern America. So that just gets us started as a way of thinking about this. What follows then are 9 chapters, and they ask questions like this. Why does everything in the U.S. seem to be about abortion? What does football halftime commercials have to do with abortion? And so on. We could go on. There's a constant, I don't like to use the term ruckus because it seems to trivialize it, but why is there a constant ruckus about abortion? It's it's always at the ready to stir the pot, no matter what issue is under discussion. So the question is, how does it stay so constantly boiling as a social issue? Another question that is very important to the book is a distinction I make between abortion privacy and abortion secrecy. And I hope we'll talk about that in the question part. But I think there's a big difference between something that's kept undisclosed because it's private and because it's secret. So I'll hold any more on that for now. So here's another question. Why do so many people seem to think that aborting women are sneaky kind of women who need abortion as a get-out-of-jail-free card for the consequences of careless sex? 66% of women who have abortions are mothers already. So it suggests there's this general picture that we have, or that's so easy to pull out, isn't accurate. Another question, why do states, although not New York, make women have an ultrasound before they can consent to an abortion? In quite a few states, they also say, after you've had the ultrasound, the doctor must read you from a script, would you like to see the image of your unborn child? Okay, and finally, 37 states say that if pregnant girls won't tell their parents that they are seeking an abortion, they have to go to court and appear before a judge instead of talking to their parents. So it's like parents or court, you decide. And so these hearings are rather unpleasant, even though the judge usually consents to their getting an abortion. And my question is there a point to this other than to harass and humiliate vulnerable young women? Again, we don't have that in New York. Okay, this gets us going. And so now we turn this way. And Amelia, do you want to begin?
Are you going to come sit with us?
Of course I am.
Okay.
Of course I am. Are you going to stay sitting?
Yeah, I think so. Well, I don't know if, did you want me to just, I
wanted to stay near me.
I'll stay near you, Carol.
Okay.
Thank you so much for having me and us. I'm so completely humbled to be with this group in this building, in this city, talking about my very favorite thing in the world, which is abortion. And yeah, I guess I really, really enjoyed this book, Carol. You wrote a hell of a book.
Thank you.
Also, Martha joined the panel because I was sleeping in her guest room when we got the email that said that Jessica had a sore back, and Martha was outside in the garden covered in dirt, and then she was like, sure, fuck it. So Martha hasn't read the book, but she's really, really smart and will have a lot to add.
Good.
Do you want to ask me a question?
See, we didn't talk about this part, whether I was going to ask them questions or whether they were going to ask me questions. So yeah, I want to ask you a question. I want to ask you, I'm talking about the difference between privacy and secrecy.
I love that part of your book. It's actually
This
whole part of my notes.
You have written questions.
Well, it's just some stuff, but the very first thing that it says is privacy versus secrecy.
Okay, so isn't that part of what you're after too?
Yeah. This nameplate necklace that you're seeing doesn't say Amelia, it says abortion. I
Do you do those for license plates too? Like
my license plate says SYA for EVA because they wouldn't let me have abortion as a license plate.
Well, what does that stand for?
Shout your abortion forever.
Oh, sorry.
I would also really like to make a bumper sticker that says honk if you've had an abortion, because it would be really annoying to people who hated it because you couldn't honk. But I also feel like it would be potentially dangerous and confusing.
Can we stick on license plates for one more minute?
Yeah.
So Nebraska has just had the pro-choice women in Nebraska have filed for a license plate. In many states, you can get pro-life, specialized license plates. Nebraska they weren't on, somebody wasn't watching what came over the transom, approved a choice license plate, which is quite cool. And it'll be very brave of women to drive around with them on their cars, but that's an interesting advocacy step, quite smart.
Sure. I really liked, so do you want to explain to folks how you define the difference between privacy and secrecy?
Sure.
In case not everyone has read the book.
Sure. Oh, they have. No. Yes. So I began thinking about why there's so little disclosure by women, not shouting their abortion at a rally necessarily, but to their mother or to a cousin or in a small, intimate family setting, because there's not. And we know that women are very, mothers don't tell their daughters, wives don't always tell their husbands or partners. Women don't use their own doctors often for an abortion. They go out of state or farther away so they can get a doctor who doesn't know them. And one of the questions that abortion providers are asked quite often is, will my real doctor know? So there's just keeping it quiet. Women actually who think they might be ambivalent about a pregnancy go out of town to buy their pregnancy kit, because they don't, as one woman said something like, I don't want the guy at the Walmart knowing before I do, that I might be pregnant, and I don't want to get home and have everyone know what I'm worried about. So I was thinking about all this non-disclosure, and I think that if you asked someone, have you ever had an abortion, they'd say, it's none of your business. I mean, even close. I just don't want to talk about it. It's none of your business. And in a way, that's true. It's a really private thing. It involves your body. It involves reproduction. It involves a procedure. It involves blood. These are things people don't normally talk about. But then I started thinking, so that's privacy, and we like privacy. And Roe v. Wade lodged abortion under the privacy in the Constitution, which it's not. There is no privacy in the Constitution, but there is a concept of privacy in the Constitution for sure. Okay, so then I thought, well, if it's not privacy was not ringing true with me. So I thought, what it really is everybody's keeping a secret. That's the nature of the kind of non-disclosure. And what's the difference? The difference is privacy is kind of empowering. I tell what I want people to know about me. That's what I have the right to do. Secrecy is motivated often by fear. I'm not telling because if I tell something bad will happen to me, I'll lose my relationship. I'll lose my parents. I'll be harassed. I'm afraid. So that's the distinction that I make. And what I'd like to have happen is chapter 9 is called Normalizing Abortion. And the idea is, as you say, you can talk about it. It's your whole work to normalize it so that it's a word you can say in public. Now you are for shouting.
I mean, I'm not for, like, there's nothing about shout your abortion that is a directive. You don't have to talk about it. I think that you can be a really good feminist and take it to your grave if you want. And the cost analysis that goes into whether or not you want to disclose your abortion includes so many different factors, and it's different for everyone. And I just, it's, so I don't want to frame it as a political imperative. I do believe, though, I know that every time someone chooses to disclose their abortion, whether that's to a family member or by wearing a T-shirt and walking around a crowded city, it really changes the world around them. And it also instantly promotes more disclosure. People tell me about their abortions every single day. And people tell me about the ways that just the concept of SYA's existence, maybe they shared an article on Facebook, and maybe that caused their mother to pick up the phone and say, who is this crazy Amelia that you went to high school with? And why is she yelling about her abortion so much? And then they have a conversation, and then their mom is like, yeah, I had an abortion before you were born. I mean, I've heard just dozens of those stories. And I think that, the thing that really resonated with this segment of your book to me, and I think the thing that you just articulated is like, privacy is a choice, privacy is an entitlement, and either legally or it's a choice that you're making to keep something private. But when something is a secret, when the pervasive expectation in a culture is that you keep something silent or risk judgment, we don't have an accurate perception of what that issue is in culture. We don't know what it looks like in a human way. We don't think that we know anyone who's had an abortion. This is why people in the middle of the country might think that they don't know anyone who's gay. It might be why comedians still stand up and tell jokes about herpes to a room full of 100 people in which 25 people probably have herpes. I just don't think that it's reasonable to expect people to have complex, compassionate, human ideas of what abortion is like if they've never talked to anyone about abortion before. I don't really think that abortion is that controversial, actually, because 1 in 3 American women has an abortion. That's a lot. Is anything controversial that many people do? Or are we just not talking about it,
Right. So I think, just to push that further, if people don't talk about it, what it means is that the right gets to control the narrative about who has abortions.
Exactly.
Because and there's no counterexample to put out because if nobody's talking about it. So it's like conceding, it's conceding a big piece of the case by not speaking up. Now, I believe that if people talked intimately about abortion at the at the intimate level, the next sort of what I call trickle-up theory, that would then move into public discourse. You could have movies about abortion that all weren't Juno or Knocked Up. 2 movies that appeared to be different, but that actually were quite the same in terms of views about abortion. You could have a more open understanding. I can't remember which state has the slogan. Oh, it's the National Federation of Abortion Funders. Yeah, there's. Thank you. Yeah, National Network of Abortion Providers.
Oh, wait, no.
National Network of Abortion Funders. Funds.
Funds.
National, if you can say this 3 times.
Network of
Abortion Funds.
Yes, National Network of Abortion Funds has a whole campaign called Someone You Love Has Had an Abortion. So that's a very meaningful, important thing. So if we get it to the level of public discourse, then I believe it has to infiltrate political discourse. And the example that I'd use is, who could have imagined 30 years ago, or even 20 years ago, that we would have marriage equality? Impossibility. 30 years ago, homosexuality was a crime. There was a slow movement, and how did that happen? It happened by people being brave enough to say, I'm gay, mom or dad or someone, and then the parent would have to decide, do I love that? I'm gonna kick out my kid for that? And slowly there was this movement. We got PFLAG, Parents and Friends of Gays and Lesbians, and so on. And so then we have the inevitability of treating one's family like other family members can be treated.
Shall I jump in? Yeah. I'd love to. Because speaking of the differences or the discussion of privacy and secrecy, myself having had abortions, multiple, it's never been a secret in my life, in my personal life, my family, every man I've ever dated has known. And I've never kept it a secret. But of course, I work in a public field, and my private life is not always easy to keep private. And so there are areas in which I have felt over the years, whether it's who I'm sleeping with or, my medical history in any area, I've felt rather protective. Of course, when I started doing this work, when we founded AS4 about 5 years ago, and when, and over the years of doing the work I've done since I was a teenager with Planned Parenthood, I never felt the need to be public about it until I became responsible for a charity and was doing our own advocacy work and showing up for others, and it became clear to me, it wasn't like a conflict for me, but it became clear that I really did need to just say, talk about my abortion experience. And that's significant, because I think when you talk about talking about it with your family, and I think that the marriage equality parallel or the analogy is a fair one and a good one, and it's one I've made myself. And I think it's one we often make, because when we talk about how minds change when people have a personal experience of someone who is gay or who has had an abortion, it's much harder to reject a person you love. Of course, some people manage to do it, but there's something wrong with them. But it's much harder to reject someone you love. And it's much harder to apply those very sort of black and white, rigid, punitive ideas towards something when the person you love, either your daughter or your son or, whatever the case may be, or even your hairdresser, literally, truly. So for me, I think what then becomes a matter of, okay, well, how did those people begin to start feeling comfortable, let's say, coming out to their parents, right? These young gay kids, or maybe they were middle-aged, maybe they were 50 years old, wherever they may be, finally deciding to come out to their parents, which is, in many ways, as you say, is in its own way a political act, right? Is in its own way an act of resistance and bravery. But very often those people are inspired by the revolutionary public acts of people like Amelia, right? So it does, in fact, take a certain level of public agitation and public resistance and, in a way, a little bit of psychological warfare on the outside. It does take a Stonewall. It does take a Shout Your Abortion. It does take a political action and a political movement in some regards to give people the sense that there's an environment and a place to go once they come out if they are rejected, that there's a community of people who are like them. So in other words, I think yes, it's sort of they're symbiotic, and I don't think one necessarily leads to the other all the time, but I do think that were it not for the extraordinary levels of harassment and police intimidation and violence against gay people, if it were not for those actions in the streets, those public political actions, I think it would have been a much different thing for some of those people to come out. And I think that's also true for the abortion conversation, because the environment, there has to be a space. And so SYA in many ways helps to create that space. Does that make sense? And even though I don't feel that I would necessarily have needed something like that for myself, because I had abortions and I just said, yeah, I can't, I had an abortion, I'm exhausted, I can't come in. Or I don't want to hang out, or I'm feeling shitty. But it was I never felt ashamed. But some people do. And some people do need to know that there is, well, you know what, if my family rejects me, or if my parents reject me, at least I know that there are people out there in the world who will not. So that's something good, I think, about that.
I can add something else. So we're talking about sharing abortion stories one-on-one or in groups, and the reproductive justice movement, which is operating from a framework that people have the right to an abortion, to not have an abortion, to parent in a safe and healthy environment, maintains that abortion is part, just by associating it with parenthood as well, is part of this larger spectrum of reproductive oppressions. And so when people share their story, they're also, if we give them space to share messy stories that maybe don't fit neat narratives that often show up in media, we can see how, well, there were these economic injustices that came into play as well. There were, maybe the person was in an abusive relationship and that's why they decided not to, maybe it was a wanted pregnancy or could have been a wanted pregnancy, but they decided those circumstances weren't the right one. And, or maybe they don't live, the people who are living in Flint, Michigan, and the environmental injustices there, I imagine a number of people might be having abortions because of those circumstances. And so abortion stories have a capacity beyond just talking about abortion, but talking about how these are all human rights related circumstances that bring people to abortion.
The reasons people have abortion that you've been listing, this book is published by Harvard. They've done, anybody here from Harvard? They've done nothing to help promote it. So. But other people have. But they did call me up with one. They said, we have something for you. So I thought, great. I said, what is it? She said, it's a radio program called Sex Gets Real. I said, well, I don't know it. And she said, well, the woman wants to interview you. And I said, should I do it? She said, I don't know. So I said, okay, I'll do it. So in any case, I did it, and it was just a wonderful interview with a woman who has you should look it up, because we were both very nervous about each other doing this interview, and it was just great. But what she did ahead of time was she wrote to her listeners, and said, if anybody wants to write in anonymously and tell their abortion story, I will, only with your permission and anonymously, read some of them online, and then I will post the rest. And she did. And they were very interesting because they were what are often considered bad abortion stories. Because abortion advocacy has this problem. Do you, 3 abortions, like, you can't come near this, or I don't think you said 3, but repeated abortions, no, that's bad. We can't have you be the face of abortion. And so several abortion providers have said to me twice in two different states, come up to me after a talk and said, "You do know there are only three acceptable reasons for having an abortion," and I fell for it both times and said, "No, what are they?" Getting out my pencil, and they said, "Rape, incest, and mine." So that there's very little solidarity among women who abort. Everyone thinks, and that's why waiting rooms are very fraught. Everyone knows they're there with their justified abortion, but not anyone else sitting on a bench. And so it was interesting that some of the stories that Sex Gets Real got were, I have a serious methadone problem, and this can't be right. Now, that isn't what you want to present to Congress, as to why we need abortion. You want to have the good girl
The
story.
successful lawyer who had an abortion and now.
Well, I think this actually really does go back, and I hate to be repetitive, but I don't think it is, back to the subject of secrecy versus privacy. It isn't required of anyone to explain their reasons for doing a fucking thing. Ever. The only reason for doing something that you do is yours. It's not for anybody else to decide whether or not it's justified or not. And this is why, to a certain degree, forgive me, Carol, I said a bad word.
We liked.
All right, good. Okay, thanks.
You got applause.
And this is part of for me. This is the privacy part. It isn't required of me to explain or justify the circumstances under which I may have had my abortions or terminated my pregnancies or had a D&C or however you want to call it. It isn't required of me to talk about the varying circumstances, how old I was at what time in my life, why I needed to, and I've fallen into the trap I have myself. Of feeling like and sometimes it is important to say, look, man, I have the right to follow my life as I see fit. And at the time, I wasn't prepared, nor did I want to be a parent. But it isn't required of me to make that explanation to anyone. And that's where privacy comes in. I think coming out as a person who has had abortions is important to me, for me, because coming out is important. I feel there is a closet for abortions and people who've had abortions, and I don't want to live in that closet. And I agree with Amelia and with you that it is a damaging closet, and it does nothing. As Amelia said, it does nothing to enlighten us about the medical human reality of reproductive life on Earth as human beings. But as far as privacy goes, that's to me where the distinction ends up lying, for me anyway. I don't know, everyone's different, but for me, that's what it is.
So go ahead.
I was going to ask, I love your book, and this gets back to it, but I'm also reading right now a book called Reproductive Justice, an Introduction by Loretta Ross, who created the term reproductive justice, and Ricky Solinger, a historian who's written dozens of books about reproductive politics. And in the book, they talk about, because you have a section about abortion, what abortion is about, and one of the things that they talk about in their book is that abortion restrictions, any reproductive oppression, is rooted in maintaining white supremacy and an elite class that is able to exercise their rights and everyone else cannot. And so even Roe, when the ruling happened, and then the Hyde Amendment happened, limiting who could get an abortion. People talked about abortion as if it was legal for everyone, because people who were not part of the elite class or middle class, poor women, people who deserve to be shamed by people who disagree with their choices, couldn't access abortion. And so we had talked about this before the session, but I think it's interesting where you start your book, because there are different ways to start a book about abortion, because it's a huge topic and touches on all of these connecting things. And so maybe, Carol, I said I was going to ask you this question. If you could talk about, because there's all this historical stuff, but then you've chosen specifically the legal, and starting with Roe, if you could talk about why you made that decision.
You mean why I decided to start with the decision itself and
Yeah.
not, because I don't have a deep history of abortion law in the U.S. I really do start with Roe. I'm not a historian, so that's part of it, although I consume it like crazy. And I mentioned, we were just chatting ahead of time, that when I started thinking about mothers and children, because a lot of my work is about mothers and children and how the law influences decisions to have a kid, to adopt a kid, to put a kid up for adoption, to move to another country without your child. I'm very interested in how the law influences those kind of intimate decisions. And one of the things that got me into thinking about all this was Beloved by Toni Morrison, which I take it everybody still reads. Okay, good. And thinking, we now live in a culture where the right says there's no good reason for having an abortion. There is no good reason. But we know you gave a list of things. You gave Flint, Michigan as a possibility. And so that would be part of a non-personal story. That would be the circumstances in which a person lives that makes up the components. I mean, we know the reasons, the reasons given. The Guttmacher Institute has given us a list. Don't want to have a relationship with the man. I'm in the middle of a big plan, like a job or your education. Don't have enough money. Have obligations to existing children. There is a standard set of reasons that are explained mostly why. But environmental reasons is really really changes the scope of how I've presented it. And I became aware of this when I wrote a short piece 2 years ago on Zika and abortion. Because Zika is a bad thing, but it is a useful thing to think about in terms of why women get pregnant. Some women don't get pregnant because they had promiscuous sex. They got pregnant because they want an abortion because they got bit by a mosquito. So we have a kind of environmental overlay, which I imagine will only increase with climate change and so on. We don't know what's out there for us. But it's so distanced the usual moralistic reasons given for an abortion to a much wider scope, an epidemic. So I'm not sure I'm answering your question exactly, but certainly what you say about the Hyde Amendment is, stunning. The Hyde Amendment says, Medicaid doesn't have to pay for abortion. So it basically, as Kiara Bridges, who teaches at BU, says, it takes abortion out of the medical system. Yeah. And that's what's happening now with the new health care bill, the junk bill that they're cooking up. And that's a very important thing, because I began thinking, well, if abortion isn't a medical procedure, because I do start out in chapter 1 by saying, what is abortion? Well, let's start out. It's a medical procedure in the first instance. What is it? And then I realized what the answer was. It's a crime. By removing abortion from the medical system, then you have to put it somewhere. And it no longer is covered by the laws that cover, the FDA and stuff like that. It then is just like riper to be stuck in the crime box, which is where Pence, for example, says he's heading. I have my doubts about whether that will happen, and I have my doubts about whether anybody really wants to. No, some do. Some truly do want to recriminalize, and that's that. But the other ones who say they do, what I wonder is, why in U.S. law has the woman never been subject to arrest? So in South America, if you go to a doctor, the doctor gets arrested and you get arrested and you go to jail. In the U.S., we've never, except in very few instances in the 19th century, put a woman in jail for seeing a doctor. And the historical reason was, well, women didn't really want that abortion. They got bullied into it by some man who probably got them pregnant in the first place, and they're incompetent to make that decision. So we're certainly not going to put them in jail when they didn't even know what they were doing. I think the real reason is people don't want to see their mom getting taken down to the Hoosgow in handcuffs.
Although we do it in certain cases when we have parental, when we have these laws in certain states that have to do with the negligence.
Yes.
When it's a person, fetal personhood laws that say that if you, let's say you take drugs, or let's say you attempt suicide, and this results in the death of your fetus, you can be prosecuted in many states for that,
Yes.
and women have been quite
In Indiana,
quite
in
often. Yes.
Penitentiary.
Yes, in Indiana, in Alabama, in Arizona, I believe in Florida as well. I believe in Ohio there's been a case, these laws exist in 29 of our states currently. So I don't know that we can necessarily say that we don't threaten to incarcerate, or that we don't. I think we just disguise it as a protection of the, and usually these laws were passed under the guise of being protection against abusive partners.
Right.
So women who were, ostensibly beaten, or, whatever, would be protected if there was damage or a death of the fetus was a result. No, almost zero men have been prosecuted under any of the laws passed under this particular guise. So I think that's important to note that.
Thank you.
There's also the case in Texas, the woman, Amelia Bonow, who was considered brain dead but was kept on mechanical support because of her fetus. And her husband, and she had decided before she died she did not want to be in that situation. But because the hospital and the state made
The
the
state
decision.
provided the fetus with a lawyer.
Yeah.
And does that in a few
yeah.
states
Alabama
now.
does that too. Yeah.
So that case, the Munoz case, is so interesting, and it actually sparked me to the next thing I'm writing, just a small piece on. It's going to be called something like Human Remains and Human Remains, except it has to have a better title than that. But the two human remains are, we have now in all those states you mentioned, if you have an abortion, you have to bury or cremate the fetal remains. And sometimes it's just embryonic remains. So
It can't even be identified.
right. It's stunning. So we have that because we want to show, if you didn't understand when we made you look at the ultrasound that you're killing your own child, we want you afterwards to understand it because we're going to make you bury it. Okay, so it's like, we want, if you didn't get it, now there can't be any medical purpose to requiring a burial. There can be respect for human remains in some sense. I mean, we have that for born persons, but when we're talking about tissue in many cases. But in any case, we have that. So we have that respect for human remains. Then we have the Munoz case, where we have a woman who's dead. She is, in essence, human remains. She is dead. It's like her head might have been chopped off, except, so there, no, we don't have respect for her human remains. We say, you have to incubate this fetus for as long as we can make it work. And I think something like 30-something states now have said, if you sign a physician's directive, if you say that you don't want to be kept alive by artificial means, that is to be disregarded if you are pregnant, either at the time that you signed it or afterwards. So we don't have complete respect for the autonomy to make that kind of decision or human remains. So you see, I haven't worked out the two remains part.
Well, there are also
but
human remains in the sense of so we published an article, I worked and edited a piece about a woman who had an abortion at 32 weeks because her fetus wasn't viable. And she was fortunate, right, to be able to go, she had to fly to Colorado, get the termination started, and then fly back to New York, because in New York they don't perform abortions after 24 weeks. And she, in the piece, described how her provider explained to her that there are a number of people who are pregnant where they don't have the means to do that, so they carry around the fetus until they can deliver it legally, I guess. And so there's some more fetal remains for you, or human remains.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And it's,
I mean, thank you. You know, it's
you can talk
terrible,
to providers and they will probably give you some stories of women who've
Well, thank you.
experienced that.
Were you gonna-
Yeah, I was going to ask a question of you that, since we're talking about fetal personhood, and it looks like Peter's trying to give us the bat signal or something. Open it up for questions. Okay,
We-
can
we
I ask the first
he said
question?
we could go a little yes.
Okay. And
He said we could go longer,
okay,
if that's okay.
I don't want this to seem critical, Carol.
Okay.
Oh, he's got a question too.
Go ahead.
Ladies first.
Seem critical.
Well, it's critical in like an intellectual sense, I guess. I'm wondering why you use the phrase pro-life in your book as opposed to anti-choice.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a good question. Second only to the question that my daughter asked me, which was, Mom, could you have found anybody whiter to put on the cover? For which I had an answer, if I could give that first while I'm thinking of the answer to what you were saying, you asked. So I looked at with wonderful research assistants, we looked at about 200 paintings, because I didn't want to. And we found one we really liked, and our artist said, no, I'm not putting my picture on any book about abortion. And so I did find an Anglo-African woman who I thought was right on the money for what I wanted, because this face has to carry a lot of weight. And when I was trying to Google search this, Google whatever, however we found these pictures, women, portrait, contemplative, not sad, not depressed, not too happy, not too old, not too young, not too sexy looking, not too plain. I mean, it was really very hard to find a face that had the look that I wanted. But I decided not to use this other woman because I decided in the US to put a black woman on the cover was also problematic, and falling into its own set of assumptions. So, think it's okay?
I'm not going to speak for the entire black population.
No, I'm just
sorry.
asking you. I mean, so I don't know. So I made that choice, but I was very aware of it. That I was very aware of it at the time, and we looked at it. We looked at a range of colors of women, and then I went with her. But to go back to your question, which was,
Why pro-life and
Oh, yeah,
not
yeah.
anti-choice?
You're right. I don't know. I was old-fashioned, for one thing. I was using an earlier term. And also, I wanted people who were pro-life possibly to read the book. So I didn't want to set them out as the enemy so fast. Now so let's keep arguing.
Well, I don't know if everybody in this room like knows why I'm asking that question, or if it's occurred to everyone why you might find the phrase pro-life to be problematic. To me, it's problematic for the same reason that phrases like the moral majority, or compassionate conservatism, or Operation Iraqi Freedom are problematic, which is that they're fucking bullshit, and that's not how words work.
Yeah.
And those people, you don't get to call yourself pro-life if you want to make tens of millions of people lose their right to health care, if you disagree with the concept that Black Lives Matter, if you support the death penalty, and, they just stole that phrase in the same way that they stole freedom and family values, and I don't want to let them have it anymore. That's not how they feel. They're thank you. And I think it's important that we look at words and understand that they have power and change, because I don't think that it's inflammatory to say that someone's anti-choice or anti-abortion. It's just accurate.
I think you're right.
Okay.
I think you're right, and that I should have been bolder, and that my own little justification really doesn't stand up to the benefits of what you're talking about.
Maybe in the second edit.
Fine. There's a gentleman in the back.
I'd like to know, are you advocating abortion even when the woman's life is not in danger, A, and in which trimester or in which month do you feel it's still morally correct?
Okay, do you want to answer that
And
question?
I have some follow-up.
Yeah, okay. Or let me say something.
Do you want to field that?
Sure, yes. Am I advocating abortion even when the woman's life is not in danger? Yes, certainly. Well, we're limited now by the Supreme Court decision on viability, which is around 24 to 28 weeks. 24 weeks. So I would set it there. I accept Roe v. Wade as the starting point for where the law is. Even Gorsuch said that is the law of the land. So I accept that. I accept that. Now, many people may think it's too early or too late, but those are private, personal decisions. And I would say, from a legal point of view, absolutely.
Can I suggest that we don't allow this person a follow-up question? Because abortion has been legal for,
50 years coming
yeah.
up.
It's not a debate, it's healthcare. Like, it's literally healthcare.
I think
And
that this is a totally productive use of our time to listen to this man.
Yeah, we're not going to get into an
Yeah.
argument about this. The subject is here. We're here
Yeah.
to talk about it,
Yes,
but we're not
please.
going to get into a back and
This
forth.
lady.
We had a follow-up over here, and
Is a medical condition.
Hi.
Is he there? Yeah. Do you believe that a man being impotent is a medical condition?
A man being impotent?
Yeah,
Is it a medical condition?
yeah. Should insurance cover Viagra? Because if it's God's will that you're impotent, then it's,
Or you mean public? You mean, should we as taxpayers pay for Viagra?
yeah.
No, I don't think so.
And what about, okay,
You know what, though?
but-
Hang on. Excuse me, ma'am and sir. Ma'am and sir, I'm not shutting down a debate that you can have after this, but it'll be never-ending, okay? So you guys can go out on the street or whatever and debate it, or go out for coffee. That might be nice. Maybe have a glass of wine, have a nice civil discussion, or maybe not. But we're not going to
You
turn
didn't
this
come
in.
here
Yeah.
in search of a fair, open discourse. You can't. No, you didn't.
In
No one-
any-
no,
in any
you
event-
didn't.
But we're not going to turn this into that. We're here to talk about Carol's book.
Exactly.
We're not. No. We're not here to debate abortion. We're here to discuss her
Yeah.
book.
Thank you.
The debate,
And what
the
it's
debate
about.
is over. We won literally 50 years ago.
so,
Okay, so moving on to
over.
the next question, please.
Liz,
Yeah.
sir, we're going to move on to another question with the permission of the
right
panel.
here.
I really appreciate some of the issues that you brought up about sort of activism and creating public fora around abortion. I'm wondering what your sort of thoughts are on, I know in the fall there was some posing of sort of rebellious legislation where people would say, oh, well, if a man wants a vasectomy, he needs to get the approval of his partner and have an ultrasound and, sort of similarly restrictive things. Or I know in Texas, there, when one of the legislators there posed the fetal tissue burial laws, there was a movement for women to send any menstrual products of theirs that may have had fetal matter on them to have it checked to see if it needed to be buried. I'm wondering what other sort of activism, or whether in direct action or in legislation people are opposing that you've seen that you'd like to see more of, whether it's honk if you've had an abortion, bumper stickers, which I really want, or movements in legislation to sort of bring this out into a public forum so that there's more discussion sort of on the direct action side.
I have an answer.
Go ahead.
So Oregon, a week ago, passed a bill covering abortion care without a copay. So more of that at the state level. So yeah.
And I have one that's good. That's totally good. I have one that's not so good, or that's mixed in sentiment. If it's thought that human life begins under the personhood theory at the moment of conception, not even implantation sometimes, but let's put And I've thought that the infertility clinics, which we have great sympathy for, are actually little abortion factories. And so so I don't want to urge picketing of,
No.
But that's
I
the
have
kind
to
of
say something
thing.
though, because that actually already happens. And this is really important. I think, is this on? Can you hear me? This is really important because unless I think you're going to, it's very important to understand and know about all aspects of the ways in which these legislative assaults are happening on a daily basis, Carol, and everyone in the audience needs to be aware of this. IVF treatments are picketed. Fertility clinics are picketed. Okay? In vitro fertilization is threatened by these laws. IUDs are threatened by, birth control is threatened. But yes, it is already considered against God to have in vitro fertilization. So you got to know that, because that's happening already. That's like part of people's lives now on a daily basis.
you mean like Plan B as well?
Oh, certainly Plan
Yeah.
B, but
I
you
just-
were talking about fertility clinics,
Right, I just
and the
didn't-
places in which eggs are fertilized and then artificially inseminated, or I mean, that's already considered. Even freezing your egg, if a couple wants to. Or a woman wants to throw away her frozen eggs that she's been saving. Let's say she decides, I don't want to use those anymore. The guy I was with, I don't want to have. We don't want to do it together, and we want to discard with those eggs, and we want to donate them to research. There are states that will not allow you to do that. So let's not. That's a real thing already.
Okay.
The thing that's been most on my mind recently about choice and about the just all-out assault, and we've sort of touched on this, but this is something that, for me, really amounts to an abject lessening of women's status in this country. When I was growing up, abortion was legal, and when I was a kid, people were protesting, but it really took shape during my adulthood. Like since the 90s and in the 2000s, there, sort of like some of the progenitors of like the Tea Party, these kind of really radical, ignorant people like teaching their kids like this is a thing, and it's all about the oppression of women. And I know that that's like, the whole subtext of all of this, but I just kind of want some, like, if you guys have any particular points that you want to bring up about, why it is that we're in this retrograde position, setting aside, the damn president, like, just to talk about, like, how this thing got legs, how it is that we're in this position that, Martha, you were talking about creating, and Amelia, you were talking about creating safe spaces. You were talking about making an opportunity for people, for women to get strong and be strong. To some extent, I'm wondering why this didn't happen 25 years ago. I mean, certainly there are answers to that, that I can come up with, but I'm just wondering if you guys have any talking points that really address why it is that people think that we can do this shit now at all.
Yeah.
I want to say one thing quickly as a response to that, and that's going back to Regina's point, which was sort of just springing out from the reproductive justice framework. It must be said every time we talk about this that this is a deliberate, strategic instrument of racial and class warfare. And I think that that's why they're doing it.
Yes.
I also, must acknowledge that all activism and, the way that we talk about our lives, of course, are influenced by factors like race and class and where you're from. And, on that note, it's really, I'm all for shouting your abortion, but you can't shout an abortion if you didn't have one. And there are 7 states with one clinic, and those states are primarily states with poor women and women of color. So that's got to be said. But I think that, these people aren't trying to end abortion. If they were trying to end abortion, they wouldn't be defunding Planned Parenthood and trying to end medically accurate sex education. They're just trying to decide who gets to have them. And we all know that, Mike Pence's daughter gets knocked up in high school and she's going to get Ubered to a secret, safe abortion. Doesn't matter if Roe is overturned.
That's right.
That and a bunch of Christian bullshit.
No, I mean, Amelia is absolutely right, and obviously, you know, I at the risk of sounding repetitive, I would agree with her that when we talk about the political, you know, yes, so was but the damn president and all, but that's what it's about, unfortunately.
I just had a question for all of you, especially you three, about doing abortion activism on the internet, especially getting to the privacy and secrecy distinction. And also what you were talking about, Professor Sanger, about you know, the analogy to gay rights and how much of community building and how much of that is sort of interpersonal relationships. Do you think that that's a challenge on the internet, along with the challenges that come with keeping yourself private? Oh, you know, so what sort of inspired this question was thinking about the way that corporations like Target or, you know, large sellers of goods.
It's really hard to get American Airlines to sponsor an abortion advocacy group, I'll tell you that right now.
Well, also they'll, like, if you, based on purchasing patterns, they'll, you know, target advertising at people in specific ways. Like, it's very difficult to keep private or secret, all sorts of things.
Well, it goes to your question as well about what we can do, what kind of creative, what, you know, when she was talking about policy, Regina was talking about policy stuff, and, you know, and you're talking about money. You know, when we hear about a state, for example, that's trying to pass like a bathroom bill that says trans people can't use the bathroom that's right for them, we get a big backlash. Bands don't want to play there. Concerts get canceled. Suddenly there's a tourism, you know, boycott. But we never hear about this when a state says that they're going to make it illegal to have an abortion after 6 weeks. We never hear that. So that's very good, the point that you make. And it's very important that we use that kind of vocal power when we are online or whatever to say, you know, this law is being proposed in this state. I was going to go to Florida for my vacation. Forget it now. I'm not going to Florida at all. You know what I mean? That's the kind of thing, the way we need to talk about it. I absolutely agree with you. We need to do that. And we need to start actually saying that if there is an alternative to a extreme right-wing agenda that would strip away the rights of women and people of color, trans people, the LGBTQI, then we need to also say that we're going to have the same response when they do this with abortion for example, when you want to vote Democrat. You know, let's say you want to vote Democrat or left or, you know, green or whatever, and they go, you know what, abortion's really a niche issue. No, it's not. It's not at all a niche issue. It's not just a women's issue. It's an economic issue. It's a class issue. It's a race issue. It's a justice issue. So that's the kind of thing, you know, when whatever candidate, I'm not going to name names, is like, you know what, if we're going to get anywhere with our policies, we're going to have to put women aside again. I'm sorry, and people of color, and, you know, come on. No, it's everything. If you don't have the ability to control when, if, or how you have a family, you have absolutely no economic power whatsoever.
I want to say one really quick thing about the internet and privacy, which is that shoutyourabortion.com, which just won a Webby Award, by the way. Which is very exciting. It's this amazing platform where you can go as a person who has had an abortion or as a person who wants to talk about why you support abortion rights or the people in your life who you love who have had abortions or whatever. You can go there and add your story in written form or with a video or with a photo. And I mean, it can be completely anonymous, or you can record a video with a bag over your head, or you can post a topless selfie with your name, last name too. So we're working on creating a range of, ways for everybody to kind of engage in the way that they're comfortable with, because clearly there's range.
Okay, so I want to say two final things. Go ahead.
How close I am to this thing, but we had one more question in the
Oh,
front.
yeah,
I thought
okay,
could be
sorry.
our last. But did you want to close with your remarks, or? We'll take one more.
So, because we've now more than once brought up this metaphor, you have brought up this metaphor and looking to gay rights and what lessons we might learn there in terms of personal contact. So this is something that I think about professionally. And
What is your profession?
I'm a sociologist and demographer at NYU. Carol wanted to promote me because she's my friend. That was very nice of you. So wait, now I lost my train of thought being embarrassed. Here's where I am. Where I've gotten stuck, and there are so many smart people here that I thought I'd bring this to you, is that what happened with, you see an increase in public opinion in terms of tolerance towards sexual minorities, coincident with increasing proportions of Americans saying that they know someone who's a sexual minority. And that totally supports what we're talking about today and what I've written on. But then this other part has happened, which was coincident with that, is Americans starting to believe that the origins of having sexual attraction to people of the same sex is no longer social. It's not something that you caught from somebody else. It's something that was a random act that comes out of nowhere, which in and of itself has its own stigma, right? No one would ever choose that, good heavens, right? And where I get stuck with regard to reproductive rights is that essentially what happened there was that choice was taken away. No one would choose to become a sexual minority. And therefore also, no one's a victim. Whereas with abortion, what we're talking about is choice. And the framing of the fetus as a victim is it's facile, but it's right there.
But that's why it's important to talk about it not as choice, but as access. Because it's not a choice issue, it's an access issue. People can't get the abortions that they want to have, and so then they end up parenting a child and living with the complicated feelings of that experience, or don't have the option to go to a clinic that's safe and end up taking other measures and putting themselves into a situation where they're unsafe. And so whenever we talk about abortion, it's really important to talk about access, because I do think that plays a role, and I'm not going to get into it because there's a whole history behind it. I highly recommend Reproductive Justice and Introduction, but there's a whole history behind how framing it as a choice issue and not as an access issue got us into this place in the first place.
Yes, exactly. Regina makes an excellent point. There's an ever-evolving nomenclature when it comes to issues like this, social situations like this, and there is, among some very, very smart people, an effort, which I tend to agree with, that we need to start moving away from this concept of choice, which is a very sort of white women, sort of middle-class dominated language framework, and move more into using terms like reproductive justice and access, and that actually helps illuminate what it's about even more accurately than the idea of choice. Because as Regina says, I completely agree, just because you have the access, the ability to make that so-called choice, doesn't mean you necessarily feel you have any other choice.
And Carol, you get into this in the book around young women who have to go through the judicial bypass system. I mean, what choice do they have if a judge decides, you know what, not today, girlfriend,
Yeah, and the not today girlfriend, the today part, Texas has now said, it used to be that if you could, and thank you for that, helpful, Sarah Cohen, thank you. You used to be able to, if you were turned down in one county to go to another, now the rule is you can only go to the county of your residence. And so that is a huge limitation on, and absolutely. So, I mean, yeah.
Not to mention the people who are discriminated against whenever they go to a clinic, trans people in particular, people of color get discriminated against for their race. So many people don't have a choice. And so that's just,
No, choice seemed good at the time, but a massive mistake because it's a familiar argument, but it smacked of consumerism. I want another choice. I don't want that, I want this. And so it lacked the gravitas, especially when put up against, as you say, the inaccurate pro-life, life versus choice.
And choice doesn't even really say anything about abortion, That's why I say that I'm pro-abortion, I'm not pro-choice.
Right.
Lauren. Hi.
I just have one question. I'm curious how you all encourage people to be an active listener, because there's a big difference between, I think, showing up in a space and kind of waiting to give your point of view, whether it be a moral argument, and I'm using air quotes because it's not up for a moral debate of what I do with my body, or a religious belief. So I'm curious, there's a big difference between listening to abortion stories and actively listening to the realities of anyone's experience of abortion. And I would love to hear your expertise.
That's a really good question. Regina, I feel like you probably have wonderful things to say because you've been doing this a lot longer than I have.
I don't know if I have a good answer for this. I think just, I don't know. I struggle with this on a personal, like I can do it in words and articles, I'll edit the mess out of a piece. But when it comes to having confrontational conversations with people, I struggle with it. I shut down because I'm just like, I have so little energy. It can't go to this. I'm sorry. When I could affect people in a greater scale elsewhere. So I don't know.
I think for me, before SWAY started, I had been volunteering at a suicide hotline for a couple of years, and I was in school getting a master's in mental health counseling, and I picked up a lot of tools in those two spots. I think that it's really so hard to actually just sit with a person and be present and not think about what you're going to say, but really just try to understand where they're coming from. And I think one thing that helps is sometimes to, instead of saying, asking clarifying questions about feelings, like, it sounds like that made you feel like this. Does that feel accurate? Instead of being like, oh, that's blah, blah, blah. It's like, and also I think an important thing is to not be self-referential when you're listening. Like, there's nothing worse than going through something and then telling people about it, and they, it's like such a common reaction to be like, oh yeah, when my boyfriend broke up with me via text message. And it's like, no, like when that happens to you, you feel like you're the only person in the world, and like their experience doesn't feel similar to you. So yeah, I think that those are...
I'm really bad at it.
You're not bad at it.
In terms of this particular subject, I think when, and particularly sitting among women like this whom I know, I not only agree with that we're on the same side and that we have, a similar sort of objective in the end, which is to advocate for the rights of human beings to live as they see fit and on equal protection of the law and all of that. I'm not good at actively listening to why that shouldn't happen, or who somebody's feelings about how they don't want that. I'm not good at actively listening to that at all. In fact, I'm good at actively arguing with that and saying no and resisting it.
I want to say on that note, to just address the gentleman who's still halfway standing up trying to ask another question. I'm really all about talking to people about how they feel about abortion. That's like my whole jam. But I feel like it's not an appropriate setting to do this right now with you. This is a scholar who wrote a book about abortion, and your question indicated that you had no idea who she was or how she felt about anything, and was a straw man. Like, you just wanted to antagonize her. So I'm.
You're not listening.
Man, you're not listening. You're assuming. Okay, I'm just explaining to the other people in the room why I felt comfortable saying that I didn't want to engage with you as a person who normally does that all the time, and I'm gonna.
And now
stop
the
acting like
and the reason
you.
for that is clear.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not debating the issue now. I have a question about the offer and the book, actually. I'm not gonna ask
Sir, we're not
No.
taking any more audience questions. We're actually trying to wrap this up.
I'm
so
very happy to speak to you afterwards. Okay? Just because we're out of time, it's almost 8:30, and because. Okay, and so.
Obviously,
Sir, we're not
no.
taking
That's-
any more
this is-
questions from the audience. Carol has
Bye.
already said that she's happy to engage with you after the talk, but we're
Bye.
trying to wrap things up.
So I wanted to say two things closing, and they're not, well, one of them is very important. In this room are a lot of other people who work on abortion. Sarah is one, Lisa Kelly is another. There are other people who I don't know who are, and so they're good bedfellows all over the place, and we should connect more often, and yes, okay, I'll do my best to make that happen. So that's the first thing. The second thing is just about activism. I wanted to go back to a small point, and there are three things I want to say. The second thing is, you don't know how much interesting stuff we've missed here. There's a wonderful chapter on fathers and fetuses, what would men do? Take a look at that. There also is a fabulous chapter on fetal images that ranges from Mesoamerican stone sculptures to modern zombie fetuses that suggests something's happening in the culture with regard to fetuses. So it might not have the lock on everyone that we once thought. It may have even escaped its bounds as being the slam dunk of why, because people are taking it and working with it artistically, which is interesting. But the little thing I was going to say about activism is you find support in strange places. And one crazy place was the New York Times style section. You like that?
Well, this segment.
Yeah. Okay. So, and it relates again to gay unions, because they stopped calling when 20 years ago they stopped calling it weddings and started calling it celebrations, so they could have weddings, proper legal marriages, and then gay union celebrations. And they had an explanation. This is of interest to our readers. Then I found an article in 2012, which was a big wedding announcement. You know how if you're one of the posh people or one of the people who gets the full page with like what you serve for an hors d'oeuvre and who made the shoes and blah, blah. So there was one of those, and the couple was Faith Rain, who married Udonis Haslem. Is that Haslam name familiar to anybody? This is not a crowd that follows the NBA. Obviously, he plays for the Miami Heat. And so in their long thing, when they told how they met and so on, came this paragraph. Their first challenge took place the following spring when Faith became pregnant. It was her junior and his senior year, and he had begun training for the NBA draft. Despite the pregnancy, she was busy with track meets and helping him complete homework. Okay, the timing was bad. The article then goes on to describe somewhat murkily their negotiations over what to do. Readers were given her perspective. Udonis appreciated that I was willing to have an abortion, and Udonis says, I'm not a huge fan of abortion, but we both had sports careers, plus we could not financially handle a baby. Okay. So that was in their abortion, was in their wedding announcement. And I thought, well, we have turned a new leaf. Something is going on here. I haven't found another one since. But a celebrity abortion is not a bad thing. And to have it in this very normalizing, I mean what they said. There's a lot more in that story, as you could hear what he said and she said and who wanted what. But in any case, I thought, okay, if the Times is going to start doing that, that's another place to push. I'm also going to investigate economic boycotts, as you've described. Which states shouldn't you honeymoon in or whatever go to? So I want to say there's some kinds of normalizing that are subtle, like this thing. And of course, anti-abortion group, anti-choice groups. No, first anti-choice wrote in and started saying, oh, the Times is just trying to normalize abortion. And then pro-choice groups okay, started writing in to say, the Times is just trying to normalize abortion. So it was the same thing that both sides noticed, but it had this social effect. Okay, so I know we have to stop. I'm so pleased. I'm very happy to sign books if you want. If you have questions for me, you have, I'm not gonna, or you.
Also, I hope this isn't gauche, but speaking of abortion being normal, I brought a bunch of buttons and other stuff in my bag, and it's all free, and you can come just loot the bag. You can even take the bag. The bag has a goat head on it that a 13-year-old drew, and the goat is saying, "Shout your abortion." And I was like, "What's up with that?" And she was like, "It's just a goat."
No, can I have the bag?
You can have the bag.
I'm
yes.
taking the bag.
But there's really cool stuff in here. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you all so much, Carol, Amelia, Martha, and Regina. And thank you all for being here tonight.